Hello, today I'm going to dive into marine safety flares, or simply put, boat flares. I'm going to cover the United States Coast Guard flare requirements and the specifications for each flare, so that when you go to purchase your flares, you know exactly what each flare does. Always remember that when buying your safety flares, make sure that the flares that you select are Coast Guard approved. Now, when you go to buy them, the Coast Guard approved ones are going to have a logo on them, sort of like this one, that is going to indicate to you that they are Coast Guard approved. Now, if you're unsure where to start with marine flares, a good place to start is with a company called Orion. They are the leaders in marine safety flares. You could easily go online and type in Orion marine safety flares near me, and you'll find the closest dealer to where you're at. Now, when you go to purchase your flares, many retailers will sell a kit of the marine safety flare, or you could choose to purchase them separately and make your own flare kit. The United States Coast Guard requirements for vessels over 16 feet is as follows. You will need 3 floating or handheld orange smoke flares. You're going to need 3 day and night red flares. Now, these could be handheld or they could be parachute flares, which shoot up into the air. Now, if you want to locate all the requirements from a safety standpoint for your vessel, download this app from the App Store. You can easily enter your vessel information and you'll be able to obtain exactly what you need to have on board your vessel. Now, before we get into the flares and explaining how each of them work, we want to take a minute and touch on a question that you might be thinking, which is, what are the best safety marine flares? And we're going to cover that later on in the video. We just want to ensure that you know that when you buy your flares, that they're Coast Guard approved and that a minimum you meet or exceed Coast Guard regulations for your vessel. Now, on our boat, we always exceed the minimum requirement by the Coast Guard, and we carry way more flares than is required. Now, our thought behind this is that we hope that nobody ever needs to use a safety flare. But ask yourself this one question: if you need to use a safety flare, would you be okay with having 6 flares only on the boat? That's the reason why we exceed the minimum requirement for flares on our boat, because if we're ever in an emergency situation, we want to ensure that we have plenty of flares on the boat. Now, let's jump in and show you each flare, their purpose, and the details surrounding their utilization and specifications. Now, if you're wondering what flares do I need for my boat at night, don't worry, we're going to cover that in a minute. So the first flares that we're going to cover are the orange handheld smoke flares. Now, these flares are only intended for daytime use because they emit an orange cloud of smoke and they have no illumination. These flares are extremely visible from a search plane in the sky, but are also very effective at being seen from another vessel. These smoke flares have a burn time of 60 seconds and they have a visibility from a half mile to 2.5 miles away. Now, the variation of visibility is going to depend on the amount of wind that you're in. So since these flares emit a cloud of smoke, the more wind that you're in, the less smoke is going to rise. And obviously, the less wind that you're in, the more smoke will rise. The next flares that we want to talk about are the red handheld flares. Now, these flares can be used both in the day and in the night because they emit a very bright red light. These flares have a burn time of 45 seconds and a daytime visibility of 2.5 to almost 4 miles. And they have a nighttime visibility of 6 to 7.5 miles. Now, the next flares that we're going to talk about are the 12 gauge aerial flares. Same as the handheld flares, the aerial flares can be used in the day and in the night. And these flares also emit a very bright red light. The drawback of the 12 gauge aerial flare compared to the handheld flare, the red one, is that they only have a burn time of 5 to 7 seconds. Now, a positive versus the handheld one is that they go up in the air and have an altitude reach of 250 feet. And this altitude reach increases the visibility versus the handheld one. Now, having said that, during the daytime, they have a visibility of about 1 mile, and at night, they have a visibility up to 12 miles. Obviously, keep in mind that the visibility is also going to vary based on the conditions that you're in. Now, the next flares that we want to talk about are the aerial parachute flares. Now, in the beginning of the video, we said we were going to touch on this topic of which one we think are the best safety marine flares. And in my opinion, the parachute flares are the #1 choice for safety marine flares. Now, I feel this way because they have the highest visibility and the highest burn time. Now, the parachute flares can also be used in the daytime and in the night. Now, the parachute flares have an altitude reach of just under 1,000 feet, which is why they have the largest visibility range. These flares have a burn time of 40 to 60 seconds, and they have a daytime visibility of 10 miles and up to 40 miles at night. Now that you know the minimum requirements and the functionality of each flare, I feel confident that you're going to be able to put together your safety marine flare kit. Now, before you go off and purchase your flare kit, there's one more thing that we want to talk about, and that is where should you locate your emergency flare kit on your boat. Now, when you go to stow your kit, you want to make sure that you have it in a readily accessible place, but that it's also a dry place. Keep in mind that if there is an emergency situation, you want to be able to get to your flares, have them dry and readily accessible quickly. On our boat, we keep our safety flare kit under the center console. This ensures that if there's ever an emergency, they're going to be dry and we could very quickly open the console door and grab our emergency kit. Guys, thank you for watching and stay safe out there.